We find ourselves a period of time in ordinary time wherein we have heard much. We've been taught much. And if we were really applying those things to our lives, we would be very close to the kingdom. Probably most of us could say, yes, we heard. That would be it. We heard. The scriptures tell us, listen. Listening is much more than just hearing. Because when you listen, there's a whole being that is tuned to receive something. Like a child growing up, mother that cares, he's eaten too much in the way of candies or cookies. And so mother would say, no more until dinner. The child, as soon as the mother's back is turned, takes another cookie. And when mother finds out about it, she says, didn't you hear me? See, hearing requires something. Application. But for most of us, we've listened, but we haven't really heard. Jesus says, listen. But in the gospel today, it says, hear. Hear, O Israel. He goes beyond listening to the hearing. The necessity of application. As we come to the end of ordinary times, we have the feast of Christ the King, the declaration that He is King. And I wonder at times if it's not just mockery that we do this ceremonially, when in our hearts He's really not King. We have more interest and more commitments to life around us. We want a better job, we want more money, we want a bigger apartment or a bigger house or a bigger car. You know, we want more things of this earth, of man's society, than we really want of God. And so we cannot really truly proclaim Him King unless we're hearing after listening. The application. Because the scriptures teach us very diligently of how great God is. How that He has created us, and then He gave us an operational manual. You know, we hear the words Bible all the time, but we don't realize that this really expresses or explains to us how this life that God gave us works so that we are blessed in the midst of it. Thank God for His grace, for His mercy. Because even though we have not yet achieved that obedience stance which He shares in the Old Testament, when He talks to Israel, He says, hear and obey these things. Follow them. We listen, but it's like the parable of the seed that is sown. We hear, we listen, we think we hear, but we immediately forget what we heard. Sometimes when I'm reading my devotions, I have to stop and go back and read it again because my mind is thinking something else. And I have to say, stop. Because I want to hear. And so we are challenged, and more than challenged, because one day, perhaps, we would stand before the judgment seat of God and He would say, Why didn't you live out the life you were taught? We will have to answer that question. He's not going to ask us, I don't believe he's going to ask us, are you saved? Are you born again? I don't think he's going to ask that, because that really was the work of Christ in our behalf. That's a gift given to us. The question presented to us is, what have you done with the gift that's been given to you? What have you done? Now, just recently in the U.S., there was a lottery, and one person won 1.6 billion US dollars. 1.6 billion. Billion, not million, billion dollars. Now the person doesn't get to take home that. It's all kind of deceptive, because the taxes on it are pretty stiff, almost 50%. And that's what the federal government gets. What does the state government get? And the local government? I don't know. You don't get it all. But at least 1.6 billion. If you had 1.6 billion, would you walk around in slippers? Would you ride the tricycle? No, be honest with ourselves. We do certain things because we feel like we are poor or we can't afford. And so we then limit our abilities by such thoughts. But when there's plenty there, we don't limit ourselves. We get everything. And these people that win these lotteries, normally their wealth only lasts about 5 years. It's all gone. But do we realize that what God has given to us is much more than 1.6 billion US dollars? He's given to us everything pertaining to life in its fullness and godliness. Why? Because that life that He breathed into us was His life. It is His life that is within us. He's given us everything pertaining to that life to sustain that life. And symbolically, the question that I would have, why are we still wearing slippers? Why are we still riding the tricycle? And don't misunderstand, I'm not belittling that. But I'm questioning, when we've been given so much, why are we walking as though we had nothing? The psalm today very carefully tells us these things. And the one thing I want to start with is this in Matthew. When Jesus said this to man, "Take my yoke upon you, and learn. For my yoke is easy, and my burden, my load, is light." It's amazing how we think to be a Christian is so difficult, because it's totally contrary to what God says to us. You take my yoke, it's easy. It's easy. The reason we have difficulties in being Christians is because we don't take His yoke. We take our yoke and pretend it's His, but it's not His. What He has given to us in the Ten Commandments, or the law, are the very simple applications of what this life is that God gave us and how it will produce the excellence and the perfection of the greatness of God. Simple. Simple. Not difficult. He doesn't talk about how much money do you have in order to be good. How many degrees do you have? What's your social status? He doesn't ask that. Because those things have no bearing upon the greatness that God has intended for us. To achieve that greatness, it's simple. Simple. We've told ourselves it's difficult, but it's simple. Treasure His word in your heart. Listen to Him to learn His statutes. Regard His ways, not our ways, His ways. All these things He said to us. Rejoice in His way. Rejoice. You know, some people even going to church, they, oh, I've got to go to church. No, this is something that should be joyful to us. Not drudgery. Not difficult. Not just blah. It should be joyful. Joyful. Now, I believe that in many cases we try to be, you know, so correct in everything, and we don't allow ourselves to really have joy. We put so many rigid regulations on us, we can't allow the joy to flow. Christ gave us freedom. Freedom. And He says, in that freedom, you are free. But you see, we have allowed ourselves or teachings to bring us to a point wherein we find ourselves saying it's difficult when in reality it's easy. There's a question in Romans where it says, why? Why was the advantage to the Jews? What was their advantage? Because of the law? Because of circumcision? Why did that bring them to the point where they were the chosen of God? Why? Because they obeyed the commandment. They were obedient. This brought them that special classification, the chosen. Simple. Simple. You didn't have to go to theological school for 10 years. You didn't have to pass a bar exam. The things that God has given to us seemingly so simple, and yet we've made them so difficult, and so much so that we think it's impossible. Deuteronomy, it says, His statutes and His judgments, and then it says, do them. Do them. Not a matter of knowing. It's a matter of obedience. Do. Do. Keep them. What happens? It results in a prolongation of your days. You'll have more days, longer life. Now you read the early personalities in the Bible. Some of them lived as long as 900 years. Why? Because the laws that they followed were simple. They didn't have all the distractions, perhaps, that we have today. They didn't have social media telling you everything, even though it isn't correct. It's my opinion, and so I tell you my opinion. What good is my opinion? Worthless. But yet we spend hours reading all these things, putting them into our hearts, when the truth here, we don't spend time reading. We spend more time on our phones, Facebook, all these things, reading the words of man, when God says, here, this is life. This is where you will gain perfection. This is where you will get away from all your troubles and your sorrows. They have the phrase now, false news, fake news. It's all fake. This is the only truth there is. You can't divide fake, it's all fake. Because here's truth, and this is the only truth. Yet we don't really spend our time in that, and this is where we find ourselves in today's lessons, finding why we are in difficulty in our life, because we're not walking in the ways He gives to us. Listen and do. Listen and do. And all will be well with you. Listen and do. Now, part of this is my interpretation of it, putting it in a language we can understand, but that's what it says. Listen, hear, and do. This is what listening is all about. Do it. And all will be well with you. Then he says something that he repeats in the gospel today. Love the Lord with all your heart. Love the Lord with all your heart. This is a difficult thing for all of us, because we are so entwined and engrossed in so many things. We don't find ourselves really in love with God. Then it says, teach these to your sons. Teach them. In some families today, and I can't tell you how many families, but you hear the reports, what the family will do is they'll give the son or the daughter an iPad or a computer and say, go to your room and just use this. But what about the teaching part? Is it any wonder our children are in the conditions they're in today? Why life is in the situation it's in today? Because we haven't taught the things of God. We're teaching other things. We've got computer experts that are just phenomenal in what they can do, but it's not what it's supposed to be. There was the news just this last week that all the employees of Google went on strike. Why? Because they were living under oppression. Google had so many rules and regulations, they couldn't have their own opinions. So they went on strike. And yet Google basically controls our lives and should say something to us. If their own employees are being mistreated, are we not also being controlled? God says, listen to me. Listen to me. I will give you a good life. We are to deal with the law of God, the way in which we are able to find the fulfillment of God's will in our lives. In the Old Testament time, the Pharisees, they had found 613 commandments in the Scriptures. 613. God only gave 10. But you see, man thinks he's wiser than God. And so he gave him 613 commandments. Can you imagine? Man, you wouldn't even be able to get out of bed in the morning if you obeyed all of them. God's way is simple. It's not the difficulty that we've made. We made it to be. Hebrews tells us that Christ is a permanent priest. He saves and he redeems. It's permanent. It's not something temporary. He doesn't have to give sacrifices because he sacrificed once for all. What a powerful thing that he could do it once and affect all of humanity, from Adam to whoever the last person might be. Once. This is the power. Can you come up with anything of man that can be done once and it's finished? Buy an automobile, sign the contract, you got to pay for it in 5 years. At the end of 5 years, it falls apart. Automatically. When you get to the 5th year, boom, wheels fall off. Why? Because they want you to buy it again, do something else. You know, they used to build automobiles that lasted for years. Not anymore, because they want your money, my money. Everything only lasts for a while. You buy an appliance, wow, we're so proud of it. Then after you've used it a couple of times, clunk. Why? Because they want you to buy something more. But God gives that which gives to us. He's not asking, He's giving provision to our lives, that which He has provided for us. It says He was appointed by the Word, and He became perfect. He became perfect. Remember last week I said He began like us. He had to learn everything. But He learned it well. He paid attention to the things of God. And at the age of 12, He was able to be in debate with the high priest. But He learned the things of God, became perfect in so doing. Look at His life. Look at how He could handle the circumstances, the situation that came against Him. The people weren't happy with Him. They tried to kill Him. He walked right through the middle of them and went away. They couldn't stop Him, because that was the protection of God in Him. He could be in the midst of the storm. It wouldn't destroy Him. The waves could be high and destructive, but it could not overcome Him. Why? Because He had learned the things of His Father, and He'd become perfect in them. Even hell could not hold Him. He was in the midst of hell. Couldn't hold Him. Why? Because He had been obedient. He knew no sin. At a time when the religious leaders were trying to find some fault in Christ, here in Mark it tells us that they were asking Him all kinds of questions, trying to get Him to make some mistakes in what He would say. He would never do this. He was always very, very perfect in His answers. Some of them they couldn't even understand. And in the midst of this putting Him under pressure, a scribe came to Him and said to Him, "Which commandment is the most important?" Now, he's coming from a background of thinking of 613 commandments, and possibly understanding, I can't keep 613 commandments. God help me. Which one is most important? He was testing Christ, but He came with a heart that was more honest than the others. Christ responded, "You shall love the Lord with all your heart, because there is one God." And when He started this, what He said is, "Hear, hear." Now just listen, hear. So He was confronting their humanity, because most of us are led by the senses. They control us. What we feel, what we like, what we don't like, what we smell, what we taste. He said, "Hear." He wanted them to go beyond that. The Lord our God is one Lord. The greatest commandment, He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, your soul, and your strength. Here is the totality of man. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. The heart is perhaps the organ of intelligence. It's really who we are. The heart is what God gave to us. It's the very essence of the being of God within us. We can hinder it, we can suppress it, but yet it's still there. In intelligence. The mind. The mind is the desires and the affections. Our mind tells us to do these things because we like them. We desire them. The soul is the very seat of love. And our strength is our commitments. What do we do? How do we follow? Because this is where the strength comes from. When we are in obedience, we are strong. Love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your spirit. This was not necessarily in order. It wasn't number one. This was in importance. In this one commandment of the 10, it takes care of a large portion of the first portion of the 10 commandments. Because if you love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, there's very little that you're going to find wrong in your life. Because you're loving God with everything. You're putting Him first. He's number one. He's King. He's King. At the end of the month when we celebrate the Feast of the King, are we being honest or are we being hypocritical? Are we putting it where it belongs? Are we giving it the honesty in our life? Or is it just ceremonial? Because the church says we should do it. Love the Lord with all your heart. All. Not part. Not part. In other words, the first thing is God. Then secondly, he says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now perhaps that's not interpreted very well. I believe probably what it was meant to be is love your neighbor as you are loved by God. God is love. That love He's given to us. Now we are that love. And we are to love our neighbor as we are receiving love, as we are being loved. It really puts us on the spot, because when we say, oh, love as you love yourself, some people don't love themselves. A lot of people look at themselves with less respect than what really their self deserves. And so if they treat others that way, we've got war on our hands. We've got conflict, because we don't understand the fact that God created us like Him, and God is love. And if God is love, then what He shared with us has to be of the same substance. And so we are to treat others like we have been treated by God. That's why it says forgive. Because God has forgiven us. As you have been forgiven, forgive. Lord, forgive our trespasses as we've forgiven those who've trespassed against us. The working of bringing out of who we are in our life, daily in our life. This brings the perfection of God, the fullness of God's blessings within us, because we're being His image, His likeness, His ambassadors. You notice both of these two commandments that Christ speaks, they all begin with the same word, love. You've heard me say before that one of the most powerful things in life is love. Christ shows us, I believe, to us when He uses these two words. But you'll find love is not just a thought, not just an understanding, But love is what you do. Love is what you do. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it talks about love. It says you can feed the hungry. You can care for the people in need. You can give all yourself, even to a point of sacrifice. But if you have love, it is nothing. But if you would apply that then to life itself, if we don't love, it means we don't have any life. We're not living it out. We're not bringing it out, because life is love. And this is what ordinary time is wanting us to comprehend and understand. We live as Christ lived. Remember what Christ said? Things that I have done, you shall do. But even greater than these shall you do. Why? Because we're loved, like He is loved. So we are to live this out. When He finished this, the scribe said to Him, "You are right, teacher, that you have stated He is one. There is no one else." Jesus' response to him was, "You are near the kingdom of God." Why? He knew, but he hadn't done. Doing brings us into the kingdom of God. Several times Christ spoke to at least two that I remember, when they questioned him about how they could be in the kingdom of God. And he said, "Do. The rich man, sell all your property, give to the poor." He wouldn't do it because that was his God. He was following all the commandments, but he had not yet received the understanding that love was what he was given to act in. The power of love is to be focused on God, not on something unworthy. No, we choose some things that are of the world and we say we love them. But if that is not, those things are not worthy of the love that God has given to us. Because what God has given to us is sacred, it's holy. And when we hold on to something different than this, we belittle the power of love. We take away its purpose, its meaning. It's amazing, we love a lot of things, but they are not worthy of our love. Doesn't mean we have to hate things, don't misunderstand, but yet love is that which controls us. Some people love gambling. It's not worthy of their attention, their love. Some people love other things. There are all kinds of things people have put their whole heart in, but they're not worthy. God is the one who is worthy of the love of our life. And He wants us to live it out in our respect for others. We are not to make things that are unworthy the center of our attention or our efforts, because love is power. Love is power. Why do all these things grow? Because we're giving them the power that God has given to us. I think you will remember that I have told you that the enemy, God destroyed his power, brought his power to nothing. Where does he get his power from? Us. Because he deceives us, and we then bring attention to him. I've been shocked. I think the last time when I was in India, a church of Lucifer. Well, since then I found that there are a number of churches of Lucifer. How can you worship someone like that? It's heresy, abomination. But yet, this is where we live today because we're confused. We don't understand who we are, what Christ created us to be. We don't follow the simplicity. Only two things he asks us. Only two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and your strength. All of that. How much strength do we put into other things to make them work so that they will produce for us? And love, number two, love your neighbor as you are loved. Wow. Simple. Only two things. You don't have to go to school for 10 years to know them. God calling upon us to be the people he intends us to be. We have a big job. We've got to impress the world that great is our God, so that they will come to him. It will come, but it's going to cost us to be able to live out the life he's given to us. He will not fail us. He will not forsake us. We must follow him. Being like this scribe, asking the question, God, what's most important in my life? Love. Love. That's the criteria of being what God intends us to be. May we listen, and may we hear, and may we do after hearing, so that we can be what God wants us to be. Simple things. Listen, hear, and do. Listen, hear, and do. The most important thing, 1 Corinthians says, is love. The greatest is love. The greatest is love. That's what our life should be demonstrating. Love. Amen. Please stand.